This is the traffic fallacy. So a little bit about me first. I work at a company called Last Call Media, and one of the things I do there is I help the organizations that we're working with figure out what problem we're trying to solve, who we're solving it for, and most importantly, why we're solving it. In addition to that, I help teams explore and experiment with different ways of organizing the work to solve the problem that we're tasked with solving. And Last Call Media, the organization I work for, we do a lot of work helping build sustainable solutions for organizations working to improve or support their communities. So a little while ago, I came across a pretty interesting story. In 2004, Houston, like many cities around the world, had a major traffic problem. As the city was experiencing massive population growth, its roads and infrastructure hadn't really caught up to its growing population. So there's this freeway called the Katy Freeway, Interstate 10. It connects downtown Houston to the city's growing suburbs 30 miles to the west. So it's this road right here, this freeway right here. And at the time in 2004, it was about an average of 41 minutes to go 28 miles from downtown Houston to Katyland, which is that area to the west. So the American Highway Users Alliance identified this as a problem, that it took so long, and they published their findings, concluding that the Katy Freeway in Houston, Texas, was the second most congested road in America. And I found it pretty interesting that they calculated that by identifying the delay. So every year, on average, 25,181,000 hours is spent sitting in traffic on this freeway, right? That's like 40 lifetimes sitting on this freeway. And when you're sitting in traffic, right, you can't do anything. You're not adding any value to your life, right? You're just moving from one spot to the next. You're not doing anything, not adding any value. So they conducted a study because they recognized that this was just a totally unacceptable state of affairs, that it took so long and so much time was being wasted to solve this problem. And they concluded that bottlenecks are caused by too many cars on too little road are to blame for about half of all traffic jams. Traffic accidents, work zones, bad weather, and poor signal timing account for the rest. This is the highways.org article. So of course, looking at this, they concluded, oh look, we can solve this problem. There's something we can fix. Bottlenecks, we know what to do with bottlenecks. So we can fix half the issues, right? Because the other half are things that seem random, by chance. You know, poor signals, can't control the weather, work zones, happen when things need to get fixed. So conclusion, too many cars, not enough freeway. So a reasonable person probably said something along the lines of, extra capacity would surely solve this problem, right? That's a logical conclusion. I don't know if anyone actually said that. I'm just assuming. Sounds reasonable to me. So therefore, let's build more freeways. Let's add extra capacity. So the state of Texas spent more than $2.8 billion expanding the Katy Freeway to 26 lanes. There's just one problem, though. Congestion on the Katy has actually gotten worse since its expansion. Average travel time increased 55%, right? How could this be, right? This kind of flies in the face of common sense. So that trip that took 41 minutes on average to go those 28 miles before the expansion now takes 64 minutes on average to go those same 28 miles. All right? So there's your just $2.8 billion is just kind of flying away, right? Didn't solve that problem, right? But this isn't unique to Houston. This isn't unique to Texas. This isn't unique to the United States. This is something that's happening all over the world, right? This is the 50-lane Hong Kong-Macau Expressway, right? 50 lanes. This is a massive highway, and they're all stuck in traffic, right? But freeway engineers, the people who are tasked with solving these problems, have the best intentions. I'd like to believe that their intentions are the best, right? They want to solve this problem. For all I know, just speculating here, as I'm obviously not a freeway engineer, there's probably other dynamics at play. The freeway engineers may be like the development team saying stuff like, hey, look, adding more people here isn't going to solve this problem, or putting more things in progress isn't going to solve this problem. We need to start limiting how many things enter our freeway but politicians and whatnot may be driving the conversation in a different direction, right? So despite capacity increases, too many, what I will coin vehicles in progress, means continued high road utilization, high throughput times, and idling vehicles. So utilization being, how much of the space on the road is used at any given time. High throughput times, meaning how long it takes you to enter the highway, to exiting the highway, and then idling vehicles sitting doing nothing. So there's no freeway slack when the freeway is full to handle the different variations in vehicles, right? You need slack on your road. You need space in between cars because vehicles are different sizes. People drive different speeds. People have different skill levels. Some people, unfortunately, still text and drive. People merge lanes, aggressive driving, whatnot, etc. And then you're not leaving any room for things that you can't control, like accidents and hazards, right? So I would argue that congested freeways need a vehicle in progress limit. So instead of increasing the amount of road, if we limited the number of vehicles on the road at any given time, we could create slack, right, or space on the freeway. So this is actually something that Minnesota did. They introduced something like a ramp meter. So as you enter in the highway, there's a light, and it actually regulates the flow of traffic so that the highway never reaches or never gets close to 100% utilization. Stockholm did an interesting experience by introducing a small fee of $1 or $1 or $2 to limit the amount of people that could enter the main city center. So what they did is they decreased the amount of cars on the road by 20%, and that decreased the average travel time by 40%, right? But enough about highways and such. We're here to talk about software development. So what about our freeways, right? How many of us have looked at a backlog and thought, wow, there's a lot going on here. Stuff's going to take a really long time. And also, nothing feels like it's really getting done. Things just kind of keep building up and sitting on someone's plate for a really long time. In addition to that, you probably thought, well, we need more people, right? If you want to move more things through, I've definitely thought this before in the past. I've been in conversations where this has been something that we've discussed, right? You've got your team, right? Is there a way we can maybe add more people, or there's different skill levels that we could entertain here? But also taking a look at how the work is being organized, right? How many times in this situation, if you looked at your Jira setup or whatever tool you were using, did people have more than one thing assigned to them, right? The development team or the creative team or whatever project you're working on, the people that were trying to move tasks through to completion, if they had greater than one thing assigned to them, right? So speaking from our own experience, this is something that we were struggling with as we tried to move projects from start to finish. We found that everyone was incredibly busy, yet value, right, the actual thing itself, was taking too long to get to the customer, right? Things were building up. But people were doing the best that they could, and they had a lot on their plate, right? And that was pretty stressful too, right? When you're looking at a list of things that just keeps growing and doesn't really get shorter, it can be pretty demoralizing. It's like, oh, just add that to my list, and I'm gonna get to that sometime, maybe, I hope. All right, so different variations in task sizes makes it difficult to provide scheduling predictions, right? Not all tasks that we work in software development are the same. You may have a task that's like, hey, I need to enable site-wide notifications, and then another task may be security updates, right? Huge differences in the complexity involved and the time it takes to deliver. So in order to maintain a positive customer experience, right, we created a bunch of costly secondary needs, like account management and project management, being on the phone all the time to help massage a difficult conversation about when something will be done, right? Meanwhile, the unit of task, the thing itself that we were working on, was just sitting somewhere waiting, idling, right? Like a car on a freeway stuck in traffic. So this was superfluous work. This was waste, right? Instead of account management doing things that could add value in relationships, they were chasing and providing, timely updates on things that could have probably already been done if we considered a few things. So we looked, we reflected, right? Our mantra was, here's just a few more tasks. You look a little light today. maybe project management should add another task to your plate. And the developer or the creative person would say, all right, well, whatever, that's how we do things, I guess, just add it to my plate. But that's what traditional management literature says, right? We would research this, and the literature would say something like, if you want stuff to get done, people need to be utilized 100%. You assign the work to people, and once you've assigned it, you can see it assigned to them, and then you manage it, right? You just make sure that it gets done, right? So what that looked like for us was project management was running around every day, making sure everyone's plate was full. You look a little hungry, you want a little more. You look like you have some room. So we experimented, right? What would it look like if instead of focusing on making sure that everyone had a full plate, we shifted our focus to setting up a process that prioritized delivering work to the customer as quickly as possible, right? And if we're thinking about a way to say that that's a lot more fun, how can we put good ideas into action quickly, right? Instead of good ideas hanging around waiting in some queue, what would it look like if we focused on putting those things into action as quickly as we could, right? So the first thing that we did is we visualized our process. So we had a bunch of boards in our office that we were using, so it was good that we already kind of had this in place, but we established another physical board with columns representing work states. This board provides a high-level visibility for the team so that they can kind of all gain an awareness as to what others are working on, and it provides an opportunity for them to help each other out. It also kind of raises bottlenecks. So when we see bottlenecks, if there are bottlenecks that we can change, we can talk about them. If there are bottlenecks that we can't change, we can understand why, and then maybe respect them if we can. It also makes hidden work apparent. So a lot of times inside of a user story that someone may be working on, there may be several subtasks, several chores. There may be a little research that someone needs to do, things that aren't really apparent in the scope of that task. Chores like running updates or making sure that the servers are running, right? Or hidden queues, right? There's a lot of times you have this idea of work in progress, but really that's kind of an umbrella term for things that may be waiting for testing or ready for deploy. Something like in progress is kind of a vague term, right? So then we moved on and we decided to limit our work in progress, right? Because there's this fundamental question, how many things can you really work on at one time? You may have several things on your plate, but how many of those things can you actually work on at one time? Those can be two different numbers, right? And we found that excessive work in progress heightens our distractions, right? We're constantly context switching, moving from one thing to the next. It decreases our concentration, and it increases task abandonment. So when we started limiting things, the other thing that we found was that bottlenecks became immediately clear, right? The skills that one person has doesn't really match the skills another person has. So we could talk about ways that perhaps there's an opportunity there to do some skill sharing, being one example of a bottleneck. And then when we think about work in progress limits or WIP limits, lower WIP limit is generally better, right, for a team, but it's totally contextual on the size of that team, the skill in the team, the experience of the team, how long they've been working together, their success stories, how well they communicate. There are a lot of factors that can come into this, right? But in general, too high of a WIP limit leaves a lot of work idle, right? If you have a WIP limit of 10 things in progress, but your team is only 2 people, then you're on the risk of having 8 things that are sitting in your in progress, even though you only have 2 people, right? Too low of a WIP limit means that you've got people with certain skills that may not have anything to do. And idling time is okay on a development team. Too much, you want to talk about. Too little, then you're not creating enough slack. So we have these flow units, right, or a card that we created, and it's a signal, right? This card sits in different states on the board as it moves from one end of the value stream to the other, right? The card includes things like a description of the work item, the ID in an electronic system. We use Jira heavily, but there are other tools. Usually you get some sort of unique ID. And this is something, if you're not a distributed team, if you're all in one location, it can be great to do this as a physical board and have little sticky notes, right? And you can have this on your sticky note, or if you're a little bit more advanced, I guess you could print out a little template, right, and have these fields filled out. I think even Jira, you can go to your backlog and essentially print these cards, and then you can cut them up and then put them on a physical board. Things that are important, though, you don't want the whole thing on it, right? You just want enough so that someone on the team can quickly look at it and go, yeah, I know what that is, right? Within like a few seconds, oh, I remember that task. So just a simple Kanban board, right? This isn't how teams work these days. This is very simple. But maybe I'll just as an example, if I was just working on something all by myself, right? If it was just me, maybe I could get away with something simple like this. Yeah.
Why do you use colors? I saw it like in the previous slide.
Yeah, great. So colors you can to represent if it's a feedback item, if it's a new feature. So someone may in the morning come in and it's just like, oh look, I see that there are 4 feedback items here. I'm going to tackle those 4 feedback items, and it makes it really quick to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and you move it over. But yeah, so you've got your to-do, and there's 1 feedback item in there, and it looks like 3 big features. So Jira gives a Kanban board. You can also use Trello. There are probably several others out there if you're looking for a digital tool. But yeah, before we were distributed, because now we're largely distributed, we had boards like this kind of all over the office. Right, and so I moved to doing, right? I have a WIP limit. It's clearly stated as 1, right? Because I'm one person, I can do 1 thing at a time, if I'm being true and honest. And I'm going to pull cup 134 into doing, right? I'm going to do that myself. No one's going to assign that to me by moving it for me. And then when I'm done with it, I'm going to pull it into done, right? And I'm going to grab 1 more thing and move it into doing. Oh no, what do we have here, right? All of a sudden, I've had a good rhythm, and now I've got 3 things that I'm working on, right? And nothing is getting to done, nothing's getting to the customer, right? I've got 3 things in progress. So what is probably more realistic for what a development team would look like is something like this, where you've got to do, analyze, selected for development, in progress, user acceptance testing, ready for deployment, and done. And this is largely driven by the states that the team feels that they need, right, in order to communicate clearly all the different ways a task or a flow unit moves from one end of their value stream to the other, right? There's no definite list of you need all these columns, you need all these states. What's important, though, is that it's clear what each column means, and you can verify when an item is in the column, hey, I know that's selected for development, right, because it meets a certain set of criteria that I can verify in the ticket, or I can verify by asking someone. So the team, now a task comes in from the left here and to do, right, and then it moves to analyze. So if you have someone who's playing like the role of a product owner who's making sure that the requirements are clear and the value that the piece of work is going to deliver is clearly written in the ticket for that conversation with the team. They may take something from to do to analyze. If you have a bunch of stakeholders, or you're working on a project and a bunch of feedback items are coming in, you may want to help speed things up. You may want to have them reporting things to your to do column, but again, contextual based on how you want to work. But there needs to be a WIP limit on the amount of things, definitely for development and in progress. So the team then, when the work is under analyze, that may be the responsibility of a product owner, perhaps, or a producer. And they're reviewing the criteria, what's been stated in the ticket. And then when it's ready to go, depending on their comfort level, they may move it to selected for development, where then a developer could say in the morning during stand-up, oh, I'm going to pull that into in progress. I'm going to work on that today. That's my task, right? When the entire team, right, has visibility physically or through a tool into essentially all the work that's in progress, they can also help each other out, right? Looks like user acceptance testing is getting pretty heavy, getting to 4 things, right? So I can pull 1 more thing into ready for deployment, and once I do that, I can't move anything more into ready for deployment until I clear ready for deployment, or I move something to done, So it doesn't make sense if we have these WIP limits and we're respecting our WIP limits for me, if I've got some capacity or I'm looking for what's next, to then go to analyze and pull something into selected for development, because then things just slowly start to snowball, where once you hit 4 there, you'll hit 5 at user acceptance testing, and then you'll have 4 things in progress, 4 things selected for development, and 4 things for analyze, and then you'll be gridlocked, right? You won't have any room in your system. So it's a collaborative exercise where the team can say, hey, look, I'm going to move something from ready for deploy into done. I'm going to do that today. I'm going to give us some room there. I'm going to make some space. This also helped us with another issue when the team can sort of see all the work that's in progress, is with skill sharing. So it's like, oh, hey, look, ready for deploy. I've never done a deploy, but it looks like I could probably, maybe this wouldn't be the best example, but, or user acceptance testing. I've never done any user acceptance testing. That queue is getting pretty heavy. I'd like to figure that out. Maybe that's something I can do. How can we figure that out? And someone may say, well, I've been doing a lot of user acceptance testing, and I could use a little bit of a break. So why don't I explain that to you, and kind of my process for that, and then you could take some of these. So that helped with the people who had a lot of work to do, and then there were people idling who didn't have a lot of work to do based on skill, right? And tasks move from to do to done. And just quickly here, you'd probably think twice before driving down a road like this, right? Your queues, right? Your board, how you're getting work from one end of the road to the other end of the road should be road worthy, something that you could look at and be like, oh yeah, I know I can move something down this as quickly as possible, right? Are your tasks in English? Are there clear protocols in place for people who get stuck so that they don't spin their wheels for days? Accidents happen, we need to respect that, but is our backlog organized and prioritized? Are our tasks clear? Do people know what's going on? Right, because you want to get something from one end of your value stream to the other as quickly as possible. So you can't go 60 miles an hour down this road, right? You'll be constantly navigating JIRA tickets that have been sitting there for weeks. Great, so as we reflected quickly and a little retrospective internally, right? What should stay the same and what should change? We realized that we had a lot of really great things going on for us, right? We had a culture that supported multifunctional teams, right? We had, so that means we have some front-end developers, we've got some back-end developers, we've got our sysadmins, we've got the creative folks who had experience working together, which provided a great foundation for this. We set up a dedicated team, so you've got your project team, and you may have a delivery team, or you may have a production team, or an operations team, or a security team, right? Different teams need to have different focuses. So if you're working on a massive Drupal 8 project, that's got a lot of things going on, and you're committed to that project, dealing with a security update that flies in at the last minute for a completely unrelated project that you haven't looked at in 6 months could be a huge distraction, could cause a huge delay. Our queues were pretty clean. We have some pretty high standards for our tickets and our queues. We had a daily stand-up, so that wasn't new to people. They enjoyed it. They were quick, they were efficient. People got what they needed out of them. And we had a culture of delivering feedback and wanting to improve, right, which we used retrospectives for. So it was good to know that we didn't have to change everything about how we work. There were ways of working that made a lot of sense, and then we wanted to continue doing to support the things that we needed to change, right, which was optimizing for getting a single work unit through our process as quickly as possible. And instead of the traditional way where work would be attached to a single person, we would attach the people, the team, to a single unit of work, right? And a big change for us, which I think is still something that we're working on and is very hard, is team members pulling in work to themselves. I think when you're assigned something, there's it's someone else is making that decision. It can be a lot easier. So we want to help transition to folks seeing work that's available in a queue and pulling it to themselves, right? Because when we think about attaching people to work, when we think about the opposite of that, resource efficiency, making sure that we're utilized 100%, right? You may have a team member here who's got 3 things assigned to them, right? So if you were to take a camera and put it on that team member's shoulder and watch them work, right, they'd be incredibly busy. They'd be running around, moving from task to task to task to task. They would be 100% utilized. But if you put, from the opposite perspective, you put the camera on the task, right, the tasks, would be idling, right, because that team member could only work on one of those at a time. So there'd be some time there where the team member wasn't working on one of those things. Right, so the switch was to flow efficiency, right, where the flow unit is the thing itself, right, the task that's moving it from one end to the other. And instead of the team member being assigned to multiple flow units, the team members would be assigned to one flow unit. So multiple team members assigned to one task, perhaps. So flow efficiency is a thing. It's the sum of the value-adding activities in relation to your throughput time, right? So how long it takes something to get from one end of your value stream to the other in the denominator. And in the numerator, if we're thinking about this and as an equation, we have your value-adding activities, right? So that's time spent during development or creative, how long it takes, and then over how long it takes to move through your process, right? So your throughput time is when the need was identified to when it's sitting somewhere on production, if we're talking about software development. Right? So we can think about how you don't actually have to work faster if you want to increase your flow efficiency. If you want to get things done faster, you don't have to work faster. You have to think about your throughput time. Right? So flow efficiency is about reducing non-value adding activities like flow units sitting in a queue and waiting. So as an example here, as an admin, I want to be able to enable site-wide notifications so that visitors can see important alerts like changes to the schedule or closings or whatnot, right? Big in schools, right? Snow day, schools closed. So your value-added time is the time that task is actually actively being worked on by someone who's helping increase the fidelity of the idea to something that will sit in production. The time period, right, or your throughput, is how long it took from when someone said, I need this, to when it actually made it to production. So in this example, when we were focused on 100% resource efficiency, 8 hours is how long it took that feature to get built and shipped, right? But it sat in our value stream for 120 hours, right? That's working hours, so it's like 3 weeks. So if we were to put a number on that, if we were to think about, in our spirit of improving things, if we wanted to think about improving our flow efficiency to get things delivered faster, right, that'd be 6.6%, which would be our flow efficiency. So when we shifted to focusing on flow efficiency, that same task, that same amount of time from development, our throughput, though, was 24 hours. So our flow efficiency increased to 20%. So it's interesting, thinking about achieving, why we can't achieve something like 100% flow efficiency, right? And that's, I think, a killer to that is variation, right? Tasks come in at different sizes, which means you inevitably have people that are waiting and tasks that are waiting for things, because you can't you're not an assembly line where you're doing the same repetitive task over and over again. It's different sizes, different variations. You may have a task that comes in and you had a question on it and you kicked it back to the person who had the need, and now you're waiting on that answer, right? You don't stop the clock, right? The clock keeps going, but there's an external reason why you can't get that, why your throughput time is the clock's still ticking. So as we looked at our board, right, you have the pluses here for when an item is sitting there, when it's actively being worked on. You're adding value to it, right? These are states where when something's sitting there, you're improving your understanding of the task, you're working on it, you're adding value to it. So that's the time that we want to add, and that's the time that sits in the numerator, right? And then we have these other queues where it's selected for development or ready for deployment, where it's sitting there, it's not doing anything, it's waiting, right? So the sum of all 5 of those sits in the denominator, right? Because that's our throughput time. Right, we asked ourselves, does it start when it comes into to do, or does the timer start when it goes into analyze, right? Because to do, depending on how your team works, could be used for a number of reasons. It could be, there may be things sitting in there that you know you'll never do, but you need to have them there for some reason, right? If for political reasons or whatnot, or you're putting something there because you're still trying to figure out what it is exactly that you mean. In that case, you know, it probably makes sense to start your timer when it hits analyze. And then this could be an exercise on a retrospective where the team could say, hey, look, if we added a queue state here or remove this queue state, you know, we can make things faster, right? What if right after user acceptance testing, we considered something like continuous deployment, where then it just got pushed right up to the production server? What are ways that we could do that, right? And then it kind of forces the conversation on, you know, oh, there are different tools we could do that, you know, look into visual regression testing, ways to speed up this process to hopefully increase our confidence enough to the point where, yeah, this thing looks great, shipped, right? And it goes straight into production. We don't have a queue for that. Great. So one of the important activities here, though, because it's not about just working faster and making people go faster, right? We want to definitely avoid that at all costs, right? It's about looking at our process and identifying waste or where things are sitting and waiting. So, you know, the retrospective is a great place to do that, among many other things, right? It's a really critical opportunity for the team to provide feedback on how things are working and what should change. So a way that we've done that is, I like this model by Esther Derby in terms of providing structure to your retrospectives so they don't turn into like a therapy session or just talking about stuff, right? Because you really want to close the retrospective with action items that you can then immediately put into action on your team. Right, because otherwise, if people just keep talking about stuff, things will never change, and that can be incredibly demoralizing. So set the stage, make the introductions, right? Why are we here quickly? Hey, this is a retrospective. We've been working on this for the past week or so, or 2 weeks. You know, we shipped it, you know, the customer is really happy. You know, make sure we start off with kind of what we accomplished, perhaps, over the past 2 weeks. Gather data, so to remain objective, if you have things like measurements on things like flow efficiency or how long it took, that could be one thing. You know, if you want to ask people to rate their, you know, how it felt, right? So sort of take the abstract or the subjective and turn it into objective data as, you know, as much as you can. And then present this data, organize it and present it. You know, what does this mean for us? Where are things that we could improve? Or, hey, look, this data really validates that what we did, what we changed in the last retrospective is really working. We should keep it. And then sort of decide what to do. You know, you can, as you organize things, you can create a bunch of action items, right? Taking on too many action items may not be a good idea, depending on the size of those action items. So you prioritize them and decide which ones are the most important. And then close the retrospective, you know, thanking people for their time and obviously what next steps would be. And yeah, so some tips here on, I think, that make for good retrospectives are documenting retrospectives. So the way that we do them is we have, in Jira, we have a space in Confluence, we have a space for, it's like a delivery management space or it's a development space. Either way, there's a retrospective section. And every Friday at 10:30, the Scrum Master creates a new retrospective, which kicks open a template. And since we're on the cloud version of Jira, we have the new, like, where multiple people can be in a document editing at one time, kind of Google Docs-like, which is interesting. Then we take a few minutes and people provide highlights, you know, what should stay the same, what should change, and then after that we conclude the people writing in the retrospective issue, and then we talk about it, which leads to action items at the end of the Confluence doc. And then we can go back to our main retrospective page and see a list of action items. So it'll actually, Confluence will actually produce a little report of all of our action items, and it'll say who will do it and when they'll have it done by, based on the conversation that we had in the retrospective. So you can also see another issue on Teams may be if your action items list only gets longer, right? Because the idea is that you want to also be ticking things off. Yeah, so combination of Agile and Lean values and principles discussed today, right? And these are, after all, about continuously experimenting and learning, right? There's no end state. It's a journey, right, to go from where you are today, and if these values and principles make sense for your organization and their desire to deliver things to customers faster, right? It's a journey. It's a trip. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Any questions? Cool.
So how long did it take you to actually make this work?
How long did it take us to institutionalize this or operationalize it across the?
So you started with here's how we're going to start doing this with ticketing first.
Yeah.
And the end state of all this retrospective stuff. How long does that take?
So that's an interesting question because I'd say it's still in progress.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we'll ever reach that utopia, right? It's just something that we're going to be constantly working towards. I mean, we've gotten really good, I think we've made significant improvements on the changing from push to pull, in the sense that like in the daily stand-ups, people aren't waiting for someone else to give them something to do, but I still think there's a lot of work that we could do as people feel more comfortable pulling things to themselves. One of the main challenges is that we're a distributed team. So it was really great as we were rolling this out to think about having it on a physical board where we could all kind of be together every morning during that stand-up and move things. But now that we're distributed, we've kind of got things set up in Jira projects, and that's been a little difficult, just thinking about how to maintain that connection as we switch to a digital tool. But this is definitely something that people have been really excited about, and we've definitely seen some significant morale changes in terms of like how people feel about the work that's going on. They don't have, like, it's funny sometimes, they don't have like 8 things assigned to them at any given moment. It almost became a joke, right? There was this guy that we worked with who at one point had like 80 tasks assigned to him, right? And it's just like, I feel like that's common sometimes, you know, for those really good developers. It's just like, oh yeah, well this person's not going to mess this up, so I'm gonna or whatnot. I'm gonna put this on his plate. Or this person's done this a million times before, I'm going to put it on his plate. And yeah, I was just like, oh yeah, you want that? Just add to his plate. He'll get to it. You know, and if, like when you added up all those tasks, imagining he didn't get any more tasks, it was like a year's worth of work. But
Sounds like about a year's worth of work.
You always hear that expression, if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
right.
So that's what that board developed.
Yeah.
What have you guys done to encourage this skill sharing? You know, like, you notice, on my teams I've noticed like, okay, there's a front end dev, there's a back end dev, and you kind of on a small team, you automatically know who's going to do the work. We're more at a push model right now.
Yeah.
So 2 questions. Skills, what do you do to encourage skill sharing? And then can you talk a little bit more about the pull model as well?
Yeah. So the skill sharing, one of the things that we could also be better at, but one of the things that we're also been trying over the past year or so is with pairing. So when there's that experienced developer and she knows how to do the task on the board, and you know she'll pull that to herself, and it's like, oh hey, someone may say, and it's really about the safety on the team, and if the people on the team feel like they can speak up and say, hey, I'm interested, I feel like I could help you out with that. You know, maybe encouraging, you know, that more experienced developer to, you know, take a moment to walk that person through it. But you're right, like when you've got a busy team and there's a lot going on, when you're thinking about it that way, that's actually slowing things down a little bit, because instead that person can just work on what they're really good at, what they've done a million times before, but they're not really progressing, right? So it's safety on the team. If the organization that has that team wants to support that kind of learning, essentially, because yeah, we've seen it where the organization's just like, this all has to get done, and there's like no space, there's no slack in that system. But yeah, pairing when appropriate has also been something that's been interesting for us as we've gone distributed, because people are in different locations. So you share your screen, you know, how do you make that work? Because when 2 people are sitting next to one monitor, right, that's a lot more effective in that. And that kind of ties, I think, very much into pull versus push. There's a lot of safety, I think, in someone assigning you something, right? Whereas if you pull something, you may not fully understand that task, or there may be some hidden complexities, and then you're kind of sticking your neck out there like, I'm going to give this a shot. and you get halfway through it, and you're like, oh, I've never worked with solar. I didn't even know solar was a thing I needed to work with on this task. And now you've spent a day, right? So is your team such that you can bring that back to them and be like, hey, look, I hit this solar block. What do we want to do about it? And the team's like, oh, I've worked with solar before. Let me jump in that, help you with that. Or it's like, oh yeah, this thing, is the culture like, oh yeah, this thing, let me just take it, just add it to my list, So it ties in a lot to, I think, safety on the team, and that's something that takes a while to build, and it could be lost in an instant, and change on teams in terms of how different people come in and out of that team is a huge aspect of that too.
Do you think the pull model encourages people to be more adventurous, given that there's safety, or are they more like stay in their box?
I've seen both. I've seen some people be like, oh, okay, I'm going to take this and try to make it work. But I've also seen people like, oh gosh, now I have to figure it out. I don't know. And then, so that's the side that we're working on, right? Are the people who are like, oh geez, I don't know, I haven't, because when you're looking at a backlog, you may have talked about them 2 weeks ago, but you may not remember the particular nuances of each task. And then you're coming into that stand-up and you're like, oh, I don't know, does someone else know which one's a good fit for me? Like, I've just got all these tasks. There's a giant backlog, it's prioritized, and then you're like, the person may be clicking on it and you're all reading it in the stand-up, and that's not what that stand-up's for. So those are the things that we're working on. But yeah, it helps with, a key element of this is self-organization, right? So the pull versus push model, people pull things as they have capacity or as they want to take the next thing. And that's a key factor in enabling that self-organization so that they can communicate with each other and figure out, yeah, this is a good task for me or a good task for you. And that's a conversation that the team has amongst themselves, not some external factor.
So where did you get the idea from to take it in this? Did you see like a presentation, or had you heard someone talk about how they were doing Scrum differently, or?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, it was probably a late night YouTube video YouTube recommended to me. Yeah, and actually we had been using, we had been thinking about ways to, when working with organizations, like ideas can come in different states, so in different forms of readiness for the team. So we've been playing a lot with Trello. Just because as a distributed team, it's so much easier in Trello to just change your states around, right? You just drag and drop, and you're not impacting or affecting all this historical data in your project. So we were playing around with that. So I was probably researching that. Then I came across probably a YouTube video while looking into that, and then from there it's just been like really exciting. Just be like, oh yeah, we should try that. And so that's largely informed this. How long? So we've probably been working on this for 3 years or so. Yeah, 2.5 years. I mean, it's not obviously something that we're always working on. It's just, this is stuff that we're continuously improving kind of in the background in our retrospectives. But we've really got now to the fine-tuning stage. So what's great about the team that works in this fashion is that we have these amazing retrospectives, right? Where I remember when we started introducing retrospectives several years ago, people were like, why would we go to that? And now the thinking has been completely shifted, where like people are like, if someone can't make it to a retrospective, it's like, oh, do we change the date of the retrospective? Do we move it an hour later? Like, what works for you, Yeah, like I couldn't make it to yesterday's retrospective, so I don't know if that really answers your question, but okay. Yeah, if there's any other questions, happy to talk about stuff.
All right, well then I have one more.
All right.
So I know you've done lots of sessions for us at GovCon.
I was gonna.
Have you done this one?
I do know. I have not.
Why not?
I don't know.
We even had an entire PM track last year.
Well, hey, I will submit this one to the PM track at next year's GovCon.
But I don't think you should just do that.
Well, the version of it that will be.
Maryland has a PM symposium.
Uh-huh.
In May, so I think it's the first week of May. This would be so awesome for that.
I'll email you because I've never heard of that, but I'd like to check it out. So if I could get a link or something like that.
Yeah, I'll connect you with one of the
Organizers behind it?
That's awesome.
Like this would be so great for they don't get a lot of people who, they get a lot of folks who go there hoping they'll get a Scrum stuff, and they end up getting a lot of sessions submitted about contracting for construction sites.
Oh, interesting.
But they need more technology ones and software engineers, but they get a lot more of the others.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's, I'm always looking for like, we've been involved in the Drupal community since 2009, and we love the Drupal community. We continue to be a part of the Drupal community. And I'm also, I've started over the past 2 years or so dipping my toes into the Agile and Lean communities, which has been where a lot of this stuff also comes from, is those communities. So I'm definitely interested in being part of other communities. Yeah.
Excellent. Can you talk a little bit about moving from a physical board to Jira, what little Jira tricks? I'm assuming you're using swim lanes and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, in Jira? Yeah. So, talk about what's worked well and okay. So what's worked well about the transition is that it wasn't new to a lot of people, this idea of having queues and things that move through different states. So since we had gotten into such a good rhythm with the physical board, it was like, oh yeah, now there's just a digital version of it, which has been an advantage, right? We haven't yet had a completely new team. We've only been distributed now for about a year, so we haven't had a group of people that have never worked with a physical board before. So that'll be something interesting to see if we get there and there's someone who's like, I'm not familiar with the concept. I just digitally move things, I guess, but I don't really understand the thinking behind why we all gather around every morning at the stand-up. But another challenge to that has been that there's something nice about a 6 foot by 4 foot whiteboard with your big columns, and you got your cards, and then everyone's on their 13-inch or 15-inch laptop, and you're like scrolling through. You can't really gain that high-level visibility where like the board kind of radiates all this information to you at once. You kind of have to like scroll through things and such like that, which could be difficult to, like I said, get that visibility and to find. Like sometimes we've been in stand-ups and there's like something sitting in a queue somewhere else, but because someone's monitor wasn't big enough, they didn't see it, and that was an opportunity for someone to help someone out. Yeah. Cool. I think they're kicking us out.